Contra III, The Alien Wars, is a prime example of Konami's 16-bit glory days. The original Contra, originally an arcade title, was a huge hit on the Nintendo Entertainment System as well as its sequel, Super C. But today, we're focusing on a title that I believe is the pinnacle of its series. Contra III was released in Japan on February 28, 1992 as Contra Spirits, and in North America on March 26th. In Europe, the game was retitled Super Probotector Alien Rebels and released on September 12, 1992. In order to circumvent German laws prohibiting the sale of violent games to minors, the main characters in that version are replaced by robots. You would think the last level, which is made up entirely of pulsing internal organs and bones, would have been more of an issue, but perhaps the German regulatory board couldn't make it that far. Konami box art regular Tom duBois provided the awesome North American box art. Another great piece of artwork that year following Castlevania 4 and Turtles in Time, and maybe not so much with Mystical Ninja. He was regularly doing box art for the Konami console releases outside of Japan from 1988 to 1994 and was knocking it out of the park nearly every time. When I think of the golden age of Konami, his artwork is definitely part of that. The YouTube channel, My Life in Gaming, produced a documentary about duBois a few years ago. I'll link it in the video description and would definitely recommend checking it out. Contra III was the first in the series to be directed by Nobuya Nakazato, who wanted to establish a more dynamic gameplay experience, more over-the-top elements, and a more cinematic soundtrack. He also felt that the game's fast-paced action was a response to the growing trend of slower-paced strategy and role-playing games on home consoles, resulting in a more arcade-like experience. Nakazato wanted to shake up the pattern of standard enemies followed by a boss fight that had become routine in the genre. As a result, a key design concept for the game was for something new and interesting to happen every 3 screen scrolls. This simple design philosophy goes a long way to keeping the game feeling fresh, dynamic, and exciting for the entirety of its runtime. Each stage is packed with unique challenges and gameplay elements. This, combined with the brevity of the entire experience, leaves you more willing to try the game on the next difficulty, or willing to start over if you manage to burn through all of your continues. Oh, and of course, it's got simultaneous co-op play. Taking place in the grim, alien, war-torn future of 2636, you play as Bill and Lance, the same Contra commandos from the first 2 games, as they fight to save Earth from the regrouped and redoubled effort of Red Falcon and its alien armies. Expanding on the great run-and-gun gameplay of the originals, Contra III added the ability to hold 2 guns simultaneously and switch between them at will, stationary aiming, and more mobility than ever in the form of being able to climb walls, ceilings, and just about anything your character can get their hands on. You get a panic button in the form of bombs as well, but these screen-clearing consumables have an element of strategy to them as well. They gradually explode outward from your character, meaning that timing and positioning still plays into the decision to use one. The top-down stages from Super C return, now featuring the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 display mode, allowing you to rotate, go prone, and strafe to avoid enemy fire. Throughout its 6 stages, you face a constant barrage of enemies that take every form imaginable, in addition to constantly changing environmental hazards, death-defying stunts, and the occasional vehicle section. The pacing remains fast-paced throughout, with only the occasional moment perfectly placed to give the player a breather before dropping them back into the meat grinder. There's no doubt that Contra III is a hard game. True to Contra tradition, you die in one hit and have a limited amount of lives before you're forced to spend an even more limited amount of your continues and start at the beginning of the stage you're on. To make things even more challenging, Konami removed the 30 lives and level select cheats from the North American and European releases. Additionally, you only get an actual ending if you beat it on hard mode in those versions. Otherwise, you simply receive a message encouraging you to try again on a harder difficulty. To truly conquer Contra III, you must beat it on hard. One of the strengths of games with multiple difficulty settings from this era, this game included, is replay value gained from having to deal with remixed content. Many modern titles just crank up enemy health and damage values, and sometimes this can lead to titles actually feeling less interesting at higher difficulties. But Contra III increases the enemy count, modifies their movesets, doubles their projectile speed, and adds a surprise extra form to the final boss. Before making this video, I had never managed to complete the game on hard mode. I had gotten close, but the second half of the game always managed to overwhelm me, grinding away my lives and continues into an inevitable defeat. I knew that I couldn't properly analyze this game without seeing everything it had to offer, so I persisted in regular sessions a few times a week before I finally managed to conquer this beast of a game. Now, I thought this game was fantastic before, but in doing so, I was left with an even greater appreciation of its design and top-notch gameplay. For example, the spread shot has a reputation as being the prototypical Contra weapon. A rapid-fire shotgun that can reliably cover large sections of the screen seems pretty ideal, right? And for many situations it is. Before I did this deep dive, filling both weapon slots with the spread was always ideal in my eyes. But in learning the ropes for hard mode, I realized the greater utility of the entire set of available weapons. Every weapon has a chance to shine given the right circumstances. I never realized just how much sheer damage the crush gun or the laser put out, or how the flamethrower is one of the few weapons that can pass through walls. So yes, this is a difficult game and an especially challenging one on hard. But the important thing about this and the other Contra titles is that it is fair. The controls and your moveset are top-notch, best-in-class quality. The semi-automatic base weapon from the original games has been replaced with a fully automatic machine gun, which has an accurate, rapid fire, and it's a reliable weapon that remains relevant throughout the entire game. And then of course, you have a large arsenal of diverse weapons at your disposal, with the ability to carry any combination of the two that you want. There's no more sprite flickering like sometimes occurred in the NES titles, so everything is visible at all times. You can earn more lives by avoiding the use of continues and racking up plenty of points, rewarding skilled play with not only game progression but creating the potential for a comeback situation when all hope seems lost and suddenly the tide starts to turn with an extra life. It's like mana from heaven. Contra 3 is also one of the most immersive games of its era, a lofty pedigree shared in the golden pantheon of the 16-bit classics. The presentation is perfectly balanced between ass-kicking mayhem and fear of wildly imposing enemies and challenges. The oscillation between the two sides of that pendulum is totally dictated by the player's skill. Your character's capability, and by extension your mindset while playing it, is dictated entirely by your skill set and knowledge of the game's diverse set of challenges. The visuals, designed by Nakazato, Masayuki Saruda, and Noritoshi Sasaki, are a stylish and vibrant demonstration of the Super Nintendo's capabilities, especially considering Contra 3's relatively early release in the system's lifespan. Biological, mechanical enemies, and everything in between are well animated and creatively designed. The environments have a similar dynamic progression and are equally well done, featuring a wide and rich color palette, convincing perspective depth and scrolling, and lots of impressive effects. The basic act of shooting alone feels great because of the wonderfully animated recoil. The first stage is a great showcase of both the dynamic gameplay and presentation elements of the game. There is a tip of the hat to the original Contra in the form of the base wall that you quickly come up against. In Contra 1, this was the end of the first stage. In this game, it's only the first obstacle of many, a subtle demonstration of the rapidly evolving scale and challenge of the series. Following this, buildings explode, an air raid leaves a section burning with flames, and the stage culminates in a massive boss that utilizes sprite scaling and rotation to awesome, grotesque effect. The music, composed by Miki Higashino, Masanori Adachi, and Tapi Iwase, perfectly encompasses these previously mentioned feelings of action and intimidation. The general theme of the music feels like humanity's last stand and everything that entails. Confident, heroic moments are smoothly juxtaposed with a more horror-infused darkness. It's an undoubtedly extremely well executed soundtrack, and it should be noted that the composers avoided relying on motifs or songs utilized in the original games, of course with the exception of the iconic Level Complete tune. Oh yeah! Like the other developers, they were confident enough to strike out into unknown territory. The SNES sampler chip is used to great effect with bold timpanis, orchestral hits, pulsing synth lines, and of course, explosions, gunfire, and other wild noises galore. A large part of Contra's DNA undoubtedly lies with the sci-fi action films of the 80s, namely Aliens and Predator. It's widely known that the box art of the original is two different traces of Arnold Schwarzenegger, although the art has been modified on for Lance, who is probably supposed to look like Sylvester Stallone as Rambo. Even the Japanese box art for Contra 3 did this, although Lance looks more like Jean-Claude Van Damme in this case. This influence is found within the games as well, from the general setting, focus on explosive action, and even specific enemy designs. But more than anything else, the Contra series sought to replicate those aforementioned elements of bravery and survival in the face of unimaginably powerful alien enemies. I think that's a really important element in both Aliens and Predator. You have characters like Ripley or Dutch who are truly brave in the face of odds that are anything but in their favor. In both films, our initial cast of characters are a group of combat-honed badasses who quickly get cut down by a kind of threat that they've never dealt with before. This vulnerability is the crucial element of the longevity and success of these movies. The stakes are high, the threat is real, and our characters are relatable and human. When Ripley goes back for Newt in the climax of Aliens, the tension is at an all-time high because we've seen this highly trained and experienced group of colonial marines get picked off one by one. We know that no one is safe in the face of this threat. In a similar fashion, an early scene in Predator with the squad versus the enemy guerrillas establishes their top-notch combat skills, making the Predator come across as even more of an elevated threat when he starts easily picking them off afterwards. The Contra series, and in my opinion especially Contra 3, absolutely nails this dynamic. Your player character dying in one hit, the limited lives, versus you having this extremely capable moveset, combined with the previously discussed presentation elements, captures this feeling beautifully. There's one moment in particular that always gives me chills. You're in the final stage, the alien's lair. The music is climactic and indicative of this being the last part of the game. You've cut through hordes of enemies rushing you, literally coming out of the walls, and defeated what was originally the final boss of Contra 1. The soundtrack moves into the first suite of the final gauntlet, a significantly darker and foreboding track that quickly spikes with intensity. This is followed with a rematch of the final boss of Super C, which again communicates the escalation of the alien threat, as well as the challenge of the games themselves. This piece matches the pacing of the encounter beautifully. You are cornered and must play reactively to the movements of the grotesque enemy. But once you defeat it, you again are able to move forward and begin climbing. The music gracefully transitions into the second suite of the final gauntlet, and it perfectly encapsulates the feeling and pacing of freedom of movement that you have at this moment. This is it. Bring it on. And to bring the Predator connection full circle, listen closely to the music from this scene from the film, immediately following the infamous "Get to the Chopper" moment. The classic Contra games are well recognized for their gameplay, quality of graphics and music, but to me this moment is, ironically, far more effective at organically capturing the immersive spirit of cinema than any non-interactive cutscene could ever be. There are so many memorable moments and callbacks that this video could easily be 4 times as long if I spent the time describing them. How can you play it today? Well, there's always the original Super Nintendo version. Hook that up to a decent CRT and I think that's still the best way to play it. Zero input lag, and sprite art the way it was meant to be seen. In 2017, it was released on the Super NES Classic Edition and is a totally fine way to play the game. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said of the Contra Anniversary Collection, released in 2019, which features mediocre emulation, no online play for a game that has co-op in its DNA, and bizarre sound issues. When I first attempted to grab footage for this video, I figured buying this collection on Steam would be an easy way to do so, and would show some support for a series that, like so many others, modern Konami has utterly squandered. But this is what I was greeted with. Apparently this is a bug that has about a 50-50 chance of happening unless you turn your internal Windows audio sample rate down. That's totally unacceptable, and especially so considering the legacy of this series. The one saving grace of this collection is the inclusion of a digital art book that features an interview with the director Nakazato, covering the development and history of much of the series. Given that this information is all available elsewhere now, like maybe linked in the video description, it's very hard to recommend this collection, at least on PC, as much as I would like to support this series. Contra 3 is a masterclass in game design. It should be a part of the curriculum of any budding game developer. In an industry that increasingly kowtows itself to half-baked, narrative experiences, it feels like a breath of fresh air to return to it. Perfect controls, challenging but totally fair gameplay, a wealth and variety of gameplay situations that challenge you to master your skill set in ever-evolving ways, and a pitch-perfect presentation to deliver it all in. It's hard, but fair, and the feeling you get when managing to beat it is unmatched because you, as a player, earned it. It's a game with very few flaws. The biggest one is probably the slowdown that can occur sometimes when too many things are being drawn on screen. This rarely feels like a problem, however, and the slow motion can sometimes be a blessing during the most hectic moments. There's a patch available on romhacking.net that adds SA-1 chip support to the ROM, which eliminates this problem, and that works both in emulators as well as on a flash cart in an actual Super Nintendo. I'll link to it below. Part of the growth of the video game industry has been to try and appeal to a bigger and bigger marketplace. With increasingly inflated budget comes the need for a bigger consumer base. An effect of this growth is that people who don't even normally maybe play video games have become a target audience. I believe this has, at least partially, led to a regression of interactivity in a medium that's supposed to be defined by it. In Contra 3, and many other games from that golden 16-bit era, you weren't watching your character do badass things in cutscenes that you can't do in-game. You weren't pressing buttons like a Pavlovian-trained ape in a QuickTime event that still manages to strip you of your agency in what's supposed to be an interactive medium. No. In Contra 3, you're Ripley. You're Arnold. You're going toe-to-toe with a predator, and whether or not you come out alive is totally up to you. Thanks for watching.
Dylan! You son of a bitch!